Hello. We will be discussing how COVID-19 has affected businesses' internal environment, specifically Facebook or Meta. When talking about the environment of a business, there are two different types. First, the internal environment, and second, the external environment. The external environment actually has two separate environments: the general environment and the task environment. According to the textbook, the external environment is everything outside an organization's boundaries that might affect it. For example, the economy or how well an organization's competitors are doing. Further splitting up the external environment, the general environment is the set of broad dimensions and forces in an organization's surroundings that determine its overall context. The task environment is the specific organizations or groups that affect the organization. So, the biggest difference is the general environment can affect anyone in an industry, while the task environment can affect the industry as well as sectors and groups with which the organization interacts directly with. Opposite a company's external environment is a company's internal environment. According to the textbook, an organization's internal environment consists of conditions and forces within the organization. For example, relationships among employees, physical assets, or the quality and size of the infrastructure that the organization is located in. We are focused on the internal environments of a company, specifically Facebook, and how the internal environment has changed since COVID-19.
Since the pandemic, the internal environment at Facebook, along with other giants in the tech industry, has shifted. Following a few years of extremely lax management practices, Zuckerberg and other big execs at the social media giant have decided to return to their pre-COVID practices of rigorous performance management. In short, if an employee is struggling to meet expectations for their work or for their position, Facebook is not the place for them to work. Facebook's grappling with a plethora of business challenges. They're facing the macroeconomic challenges that are affecting all of the tech industry, while also more specific challenges to their business. Its stock price has been slashed in the last year due to an abysmal month of March following a problem that caused its advertising business to be severely harmed. Naturally, the corporate executives at Facebook are taking action. Employees know that budgets are being cut and stricter management will be implemented. And they're wondering how all these changes will affect their careers. Facebook is known for granting its employees top-notch medical benefits, free food, high salaries. But with their economic issues, the pros of being a Facebook employee are dwindling. Morale at big tech companies these days is way down. Dan Ives, who's a financial analyst at Wedbush Securities, said, "For Facebook, it's been a fairy tale story over the last decade, and it's a darker chapter for the company, and they need to navigate it." The company's making changes. Tracy Clayton, a Facebook spokesperson, was quoted saying, "Any company that wants to have a lasting impact has to practice discipline and prioritization of work with a high level of intensity to reach goals. Low performers do not belong." From the top down, time is up for employees at Meta who do not meet company standards. Zuckerberg and other top execs have made it clear that it's unacceptable for an employee to be neutral or negative for the company. Head of engineering Mahir Saleh sent out a memo to managers stating that they should begin to identify their low performers and put them inside an internal human resources system to get rid of them. In summary, this is a new time for Meta. The landscape has changed, and the necessary moves to begin thriving again as a business have to be made. The internal environment at Meta is no different. The attitude from management is much more tense, it's much more competitive, and it's much more rigorous. So employees at Facebook, now known as Meta, they're either going to have to get right or get left.
Facebook executives were ready to get rid of those COVID-era changes and revert back to the rigorous performance management that Facebook employed previously. The executives explained that these changes are crackdowns on lax management practices that have been allowed to develop at Facebook in recent years, not just during COVID, but also starting before. With large social platforms such as TikTok cropping up, sapping Facebook's younger users, as well as the government's restrictions on Facebook's data collecting and Facebook's foray into building a metaverse, revenue has declined. Due to that, morale at Facebook has been greatly reduced, and the work now falls on the shoulders of managers who are expected to lead their large workforces through troubling times where Facebook grapples with cutting jobs, salaries, and benefits. One of the most difficult changes managers must face now is a directive by executives to take a good look at their employees and decide if these roles are truly necessary or if they can be cut. The worst directive may have come in a memo from executives, though, which told managers to identify their low performers and put them into an internal human resources system. While Facebook did not say what that human resources system will entail, it is assumed that it will be monitoring and potential firing. Facebook's internal anonymous message board, Blind, has seen an uptick in worker resentment, leading to an even harder task for managers. While some worker resentment is normal, especially in an economic downturn and company-specific downturn like Facebook, Facebook, as with most tech companies, prides themselves on a great internal culture, and worker resentment growing in Facebook spells problems not just for executives, but for managers that have to lead those teams. First, they must grapple with a not-so-subtle hit to cut jobs, and at the same time attempt to lead their employees amid an increase in worker resentment and economic downturn where inflation has gone crazy. According to the article, Facebook's internal performance reviews of employees may also be placing more pressure on those managers. Facebook's want their ratings to be calibrated across different teams, such as accounting and coding, which according to some employees leads to some workers undeservedly receiving lower ratings as managers are pressured to fill that category. For example, an employee may be at a 5, but there aren't enough employees in that team that deserve a 3, so that employee that has a 5 is dropped down to a 3 to calibrate across all teams, making it seem as though they're not as good of a worker as they actually are. With the threat of job cuts looming, filling up a category with maybe some employees who deserved higher ratings could spell firing for those employees. As a manager in Facebook, their jobs have now become increasingly difficult, as any bad review or job deemed unnecessary by them may lead to a firing due to the looming threat of job cuts. In addition, they must navigate morale downturns and economic downturns and continue to help their team perform to the best of their abilities.
While Facebook has been the forerunner for receiving attention about its internal operations during the pandemic, there have been plenty of other well-known companies that have made a drastic shift in their internal and external operations to combat complacency during COVID-19. Spotify can be looked at for how they have changed their order of operations during the pandemic to receive more profit than ever before. During the pandemic, the Swedish company was primarily focused on making revenue from solely streaming music and playing advertisements for non-premium users. During the pandemic, Spotify realized that music was not enough for many people stuck at home to escape that depressing reality. That was when Spotify became the first company to start streaming podcasts. There were several deals made with well-known celebrities such as Joe Rogan to have their content streamed on the platform. This would dramatically increase podcast listeners, which in turn led to millions of new subscribers for Spotify. It turns out that the way many people needed to escape the depressing reality of the pandemic was just to hear other people talking about trivial things. As digital services have provided a somewhat easier time switching up their methods of operation during the pandemic, traditional businesses such as restaurants have had to get more creative with their approaches. Many restaurants started offering paid tutorials on how to make their food at home, along with opening many options such as takeout and delivery systems. At a time where human contact was forced to be limited, it was essential for restaurants to change their internal operations in order to stay afloat during turbulent times. Another business impacted by the pandemic that had to change its internal operations are considered to be the very staple of modern society. Grocery stores were struck extremely hard by the pandemic due to decreased supply of goods, along with trying to accommodate spatial requirements for customers. Many stores looked to partner with digital services such as Instacart, which allowed a person to receive and deliver groceries in a contactless way. Stores such as Publix began setting up certain areas where customers could retrieve their groceries without having to risk exposure by walking around the store for an hour. Instacart also allowed many people, myself included, to make money during the pandemic when many jobs and opportunities were no longer available. Though in our presentation, we have named only a few examples of companies changing their order of operations to combat the pandemic, there are thousands, if not millions, of more examples of companies adapting to the situation they were put in order to survive through turbulent times. For many companies, during the time of the pandemic, their responses had an almost primal ring to it: adapt or perish. It is truly amazing to see just how many companies managed to just innovate and restructure their internal and external operations in order to survive these troubling times. Hopefully, these companies will be able to use these methods to develop their products and services even further in the future to be able to withstand under any condition.
Here is a list of important summary points. 1. Internal environment consists of forces within an organization. 2. External environment consists of everything outside of a company's boundaries that might affect it. 3. Meta is facing many challenges since COVID-19, which is causing the internal environment to change drastically. 4. Meta is reverting back to their old style of management. 5. Managers are forced to navigate employees through a downturn during a period where employee resentment is growing. 6. The insistence of filling internal rating groups has caused some managers to give lower employee ratings. 7. Digital-based companies had to rewrite their internal operations in order to appeal to a broader audience during the pandemic. 8. Restaurants had to drastically change their internal operations in order to survive during the pandemic. And 9. Although companies like Facebook get the most attention, the vast majority of companies in America had to make significant changes in order to stay afloat during the pandemic. Finally, here are our sources. Thank you so much for watching.